if you shut your mouth and keep quiet, you may get what you want. All right? Otherwise, you're just like boring me to death and probably everybody else.
The reason Van Morrison was physically forced on stage to perform and surreal encounters. I write songs, then I record them, and later maybe I perform them on stage. That's what I do. That's my job. Simple. Van Morrison. As simple as that may sound, Van Morrison has also struggled through some dark moments in the midst of performing his brilliant music. The reason may be a tormenting paradox that you are probably familiar with. But when it affects a performer, the inability to work through it can sometimes create destructive, unintended consequences. Let's explore some of Van Morrison's most captivating and conflicted moments as a performer, as well as some surreal encounters he has had with other musicians, while we try to understand how a legendary singer-songwriter copes or doesn't cope with his dark side. What patterns emerge through each encounter that provide clues? Once you have all the puzzle pieces surrounding a troubadour stuck in the absurdity of a modern world, then you can decide for yourself what the real story is. Growing up near Belfast, Van Morrison was exposed to American R&B music through his father. He eventually formed bands including Them in 1964. The band had several successful singles, including Gloria, Here Comes the Night, and Baby Please Don't Go. The classic Gloria went on to become a rock standard covered by The Doors, Jimi Hendrix, Patti Smith, and many others.
And we heard some thing you were in the monastery sometime. Is it true?
Yeah, I was, yeah.
Why?
Because I was completely sick of the pop scene and I just wanted to get away from it all because it was getting too much, you know? So it's so false. The pop scene is false, you know? It's not real.
And there was something, you want to become a monk. Was that true?
Well, no, I didn't actually want to become a monk. I went and they said they would let me stay there for as long as I intended to stay, to think, you know, and read, philosophize, you know.
Them was soon signed by Decca to a 2-year recording contract. At the Decca Studios in London, session musicians were often used instead of the band members on recordings to accurately perform each song for the record, which at the time included a young session guitarist, Jimmy Page. During their tour of England, Them gained a reputation for having bad manners and being rude during interviews. In December 1964, Them made their television debut, joining the Rolling Stones on Ready, Steady, Go. Then, in April 1965, Them made an appearance at the NME British Music Awards alongside the Beatles, the Kinks, and the British Invasion's most famed performers. After the performances, NME's Derek Johnson commented that Morrison had more genuine soul than any of his British contemporaries. Indeed, Van Morrison was on his way to becoming one of the most legendary soulful performers of a generation. During their tour in America in 1966, Them began having disputes around money and soon broke up. Van Morrison said of the breakup, "There was no motive behind anything you did back then. You just did it because you wanted to do it and you enjoyed doing it. That's the way the thing started, but it got twisted somewhere along the way, and everybody involved in it got twisted as well, including me. You can't take something like that, put it in a box and place a neat little name on it, then try to sell it. That's what they tried to do. That's what killed them."
You know I love you so, baby, please don't go.
In March 1967, Van Morrison returns to the U.S. with Them producer Burt Burns and recorded the album Blowin' Your Mind, which was intended to be just 4 singles. However, the album was released without Morrison's consent. He recalls getting a call about the album and psychedelic album cover, which he hated. He had this to say about the experience. I got a call saying it was an album coming out and this is the cover, and I saw the cover and I almost threw up, you know. His wife at the time, Janet, said, "He never has been, never will be anything approaching a psychedelic user, wants nothing to do with it, wants nothing to do with any drug of any kind." On that album, Van Morrison has a song that will emerge as a pop hit, a classic that will follow him throughout his long career, Brown-Eyed Girl. Another song that is a standout is the long and dark TB sheets in which the listener is placed in a room with someone dying of tuberculosis. The narrator wants to escape from the enclosed room smelling of death and disease. Brian Hinton described the song's music. "Here is a Dickensian tale of death and decay in a big city. Organ and drums go free form, then a stately groove, fitting Van's voice like a garret, led by nagging lead guitar.
And the sunlight shines through the crack in the window pane. Laughing and a running, hey, hey, skipping and a jumping.
Do you ever have any spare time to yourself?
Not much. No.
What do you do when you have a moment off? Do you work?
No, I kind of just walk about, parts of cities and the rain and things like that.
You compose in your spare time?
Yeah.
Did you write this next song?
Yeah, I wrote this next one, yeah.
Let's try it on for size, all right? Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Van Morrison.
I must create a system or be enslaved by another man's. I will not reason and compare. My business is to create. William Blake. Following the death of Them's producer Burt Burns in 1967, Morrison became involved in a contract dispute with Burns' widow, Eileen Burns, that prevented him from performing on stage or recording in the New York area. Morrison moved to Boston and struggled financially while finding it difficult to find gigs. He recalls of the time in a 2016 interview with the Irish Independent. "I got an award a couple of months ago. Somebody introduced me and said he was part of the British invasion. I got up and said, matter of fact, I was never part of the British invasion, because when I went to America as a solo artist, I couldn't get arrested," which was true. "I had to go through several years of struggling and being blacklisted, because I didn't go along with their program, that's why. That's the only reason why anybody's blacklisted, because you don't want to be a effing slave, right? They didn't want anybody who wasn't going to bend over for them. You're not complying, and they want you to comply. All this BS about rebels and all that crap, they're all establishment and complying all the time. All these so-called rebels, rock and roll BS, they're all conformists. Real rebels are people like Jerry Lee Lewis and Gene Vincent." Eventually, Warner Brothers buys out the remaining contract Morrison had at Bang Records, and he then records his second album, Astral Weeks, in 1968. Astral Weeks has the ability to pull you out of reality and into a free-flowing state of imagination and emotion. Morrison has said, "When Astral Weeks came out, I was starving, literally." It sounded like the man who made Astral Weeks was in terrible pain most of Van Morrison's previous works had only suggested. There was a redemptive element in the blackness, ultimate compassion for the suffering of others, and a swath of pure beauty and mystical awe that cut right through the heart of the work. Lester Bangs. Morrison said the songs on Astral Weeks were written prior to 1968 over a period of 5 years. He comments, "It's not about me. It's totally fictional. It's put together of composites of conversations I heard, things I saw in movies, newspapers, books, whatever. It comes out as stories. That's it. There's no more."
Silence is the to be born again. And I was strong and merry when jumped the hedges first. We strolled through fields all wet with rain. I'm back home. And I live for one bow, one call me.
Morrison and his wife Janet moved to upstate New York in the Catskills near Woodstock, and he begins writing his next album. Next up is Moondance in 1970. The music incorporates soul, jazz, pop, and Irish folk. Moondance received critical acclaim upon its release, including Rolling Stone hailing it as a work of musical invention and lyrical confidence. The success of Moondance lent Morrison a rising cultural iconicity and presence in the burgeoning singer-songwriter movement of the 1970s. The entire album transcends anything else Morrison had done up to this point, and every song is practically an unconscious part of the modern zeitgeist.
Half a mile from the county fair, and the rain came pouring down. Me and Bullet, I can hear her heartbeat from 1,000 miles. Yeah, I see my freedom from across the way. These dreams of you, so real and so true. We shall walk again on a longer lane. And I wanna rock your gypsy soul. Switch on your electric light, that we can get down. Well, it's a marvelous night for a moon dance with the stars up above in your eyes.
It is during the period of Moondance that the emergence of Van Morrison's stage fright begins to become speculated by audiences. However, this may be more deeper than performance anxiety that many performers grapple with at some point. I'm an introvert in a business of extroverts, which is kinda a big problem. Van Morrison. Morrison turns his attention deeply inward during his live performances, rarely making eye contact for more than a moment. It is hard to say if this is a calculated theater or if it is him trying to get through the performance without being completely overwhelmed by anxiety. It is long believed that he is suffering from stage fright, which seems to get worse over time, maybe even a deeper disorder. In his Cypress Avenue performance, he cannot seem to make eye contact with the audience. At the end of the performance, walks right off the stage immediately following the song without saying a word and no encore.
Well, encore one more time. Way up on Cypress Avenue. To stop now.
Van Morrison becomes combative towards the audience out of nowhere and again cannot seem to make eye contact.
Yeah, if you shut your mouth and keep quiet, you may get what you want. All right? Otherwise, you're just like boring me to death and probably everybody else.
Thanksgiving Day, November 25, 1976, Winterland Ballroom in San Francisco. The Last Waltz was advertised as the band's farewell concert appearance. It was Morrison's first live performance in several years, and he considered skipping his appearance until the last minute, even refusing to go on stage when they announced his name. His manager, Harvey Goldsmith, said he literally kicked him out there to get him to perform. Suffering from last-minute stage fright, Van Morrison had to be physically forced on stage to perform with the band. After his first song, he heads right into Caravan. By song's end, everyone is left in awe. Music journalist Grail Marcus, in attendance at the concert, wrote, "Van Morrison turned the show around, singing to the rafters and burning holes in the floor. It was a triumph, and as the song ended, Van began to kick his leg into the air out of sheer exuberance, and he kicked his way right off stage like a rocket. The crowd had given him a fine welcome, and they cheered wildly when he left."
One more time. Wow! So
Over the years, Van Morrison becomes known for his unpredictable antics surrounding his live performances, becoming more and more annoyed with the audience. He avoids eye contact, which eventually leads to him wearing sunglasses and a fedora during concerts, and abruptly ending the shows without an encore. Van Morrison, notoriously sensitive and volatile, can often be perceived as nervous or shy, showing characteristics of stage fright. He often masks it with anger. I dig singing the songs, but there are times when it's pretty agonizing for me to be out there. Van Morrison's freewheeling trademark improvisations during his live performances are part of the reason for his loyal following through the years. Willing to bare his soul throughout all his torment is what makes him such an appealing performer. There is no hiding behind the gimmicks of light shows or modern technology. Morrison delivers a soulful punch of vulnerability, while his utter lack of pretense makes him more human to his audience, which has developed into somewhat of a cult-like following over the years. He has also been copied mercilessly by other performers and discusses this frustration in a revealing 1985 interview. The interviewer, Stephen Davis, asks him, "Elvis Costello, Graham Parker, Daryl Hall all grew up with and were obviously influenced by your music. Do you get a twinge hearing yourself in the music they're putting out?" Morrison responds, "Well, I do now. You see, for a long time I'd never even heard of these people because I don't really listen to pop radio or any of that. I have my own preferences for music and my own albums that I play, so I'm not really influenced by what the media are running through. For years, people have been saying to me, 'Have you heard this guy Springsteen? You should really check him out.' I just ignored it. Then 4 or 5 months ago, I was in Amsterdam and a friend of mine put on a video. Springsteen came on the video, and that was the first time I ever saw him, and he's definitely ripped me off. There's no doubt about that. I mean, he's even ripped my movements off as well. My 70s movements, you know what I mean?" Van Morrison's folklore is probably also part of the reason these musicians wanted to be part of his shows when the opportunity presented itself. However, they probably did not expect these surreal encounters to occur. In Ricky Lee Jones' autobiography, Last Chance Texaco, she tells a story of her meeting Van Morrison at one of his shows in 1983 in Ireland. The story goes, Ricky had been dreaming of meeting Morrison since she heard Astral Weeks as a teenager. So when she found out he would be playing at Lisdon Varna Festival in County Clare, she made plans to stop there for the show. She describes the show as magical and comments on Morrison's happy demeanor while performing, even smiling when a punk rocker jumped on stage and started jumping around him. As she was hanging out on the grass backstage awkwardly, he eventually approached her and offered to get her a coffee. She describes him and their meeting as more of a fangirl than a contemporary. Later, he saw her leaving looking for a ride and pulled up in his limo and offered her a ride back to the hotel. They had a pleasant conversation discussing Levon Helm, Dr. John, and San Francisco. Everything was going fine when, according to Jones, Morrison turns angry and begins yelling at her. She describes being very shaken up. It was as if he blanked out on who I was or how I got in his limo, because he was angry about some journalist and what journalists take for granted or some such thing. I just happened to be there to yell at. Suddenly, I was utterly rejected, so high and now so low I was crushed, shaken to my core. Jones continues on about the awkward rest of the ride. Van got out, slammed the limo door, and stormed into the hotel with me following behind. He did not speak another word, not even a good night. I was lucky to get a room. I came out and sat with the band at the bar. Mark Isham, who was playing in Morrison's band on the tour and witnessed the entire encounter, said, "He's just like that. He does that to everybody. It's not personal." After a night of little sleep due to the disturbing encounter, she saw Isham in the lobby the following morning, who gave her his number. She describes in honest candor Van Morrison after seeing this. Van was watching Mark when he handed me the note. Maybe Van needed clues on how to act civil or on what people do when... But something clicked. He hurried up to me at the front desk. He too scribbled something on a piece of paper and handed it to me, then said in his ferociously Belfast brogue, "If you ever come to London, give us a call." Then he rushed to the bus and was gone. In the autobiography Riders on the Storm by Doors drummer John Densmore and his following book The Seekers, he describes two encounters with Van Morrison, one in 1966 as a member of the Doors when both were still up and coming, and the other in 2008. In 1966, when the Doors were the house band at the Whiskey, they played alongside Van Morrison's band Them, who had a 2-week-long residency in June. He describes the first night. The band brashly took the stage. They slammed through several songs one right after another, making them indistinguishable. Van seemed drunk and very uptight, crashing the mic stand down on the stage. When he dropped his lower jaw and tongue and let out one of those yells of rage, something Irish in me made my skin crawl with goosebumps. Densmore also describes the after-party with Van Morrison. Ronnie drove me, Van, and a few other people to a small party at her apartment at 2 a.m. Most of us made small talk while Van glowered in the corner. Then, all of a sudden, he grabbed Ronnie's guitar and blasted into vocals, singing about being a stranger in this world and wanting to be reincarnated into another time with another face. Ultimately, these lyrics would end up on the transcendental Astral Weeks album. It was as if Van couldn't communicate on a small talk party level, so he just burst into his songs. We were mesmerized. John Densmore goes on to tell the story of his last surreal encounter with Van Morrison in 2008. On November 6, 2008, I got a phone call from Van's people inquiring whether I wanted to play Gloria with him and his band at the Hollywood Bowl. Hell yes. After all, I'd already played Gloria with him, his band, and my band at the Whiskey in 1966. Densmore then describes the lead up to the performance moment. His manager told me the plan was for Gloria to be the encore just before intermission. I would walk out with Van, he would introduce me, and then we'd play the song. Easy enough. Densmore watched a nervous Van Morrison perform from the side of the stage during the show. It was clear that Van wasn't relaxed. Something inside him seemed to be always on pins and needles. He then describes himself and Van Morrison waiting on the side of the stage to go on together. I stood beside him as we waited for our cue. He asked about Ray and Robbie, which was sweet. We walked out together on that magnificent stage under the shell at the Hollywood Bowl, but I could tell that Van couldn't take in the applause he was getting. Something was torturing him. Then he began to torture me, though not on purpose, I think. In his preoccupied state of mind, he forgot to introduce me. The band was waiting for their cue to start the song, and it didn't come. The awkward silence needed to be broken, so the guitar player started the opening chords to Gloria. After a few bars, the rest of the band had to kick in, so they did, leaving me standing there in front of 10,000 people wondering what to do. Walking off would have been weird. I spotted a tambourine under the backup singer's riser, so I walked over, picked it up, and started playing it as if that had been part of the plan. Needless to say, I was not happy. At that moment, I didn't give a shit about how talented Van was. This was humiliating. So I just continued to play the tambourine with a fake smile. At the finish, we all headed for the wings, with the roaring crowd fading as we exited. Van seemed to disappear. His manager came up to me, expounding major apologies. While Densmore acknowledges that the audience did not know what had happened, he couldn't even listen to Van Morrison's songs after that for years, but eventually got past it. However, in his book, he does provide incredible insight all fans should consider. It took me a year or so to get over what had happened because when someone you know behaves badly, it can cloud your appreciation of their work. When comparing the concert footage to the Densmore story, something doesn't add up. There seems to be a miscommunication. The music was playing as Van walked out on stage, so when would he have been able to introduce Densmore? There is already a drummer sitting at the drum kit. Maybe there was a change of plans that did not get communicated with Densmore, which was the tour manager's job, who he said was apologetic. For Ricky Lee Jones's story, it is hard to say since we only have her side of the story many years later, and she was in the midst of kicking a drug and alcohol habit. As for the other concert moments, it may have just been an off day for a shy Van Morrison who doesn't mince words. He certainly has to deal with a lot of ridiculous people on the road and in the music industry. That's enough to make anyone snap every once in a while. What we do know is that Van Morrison is one of the most spellbinding soulful singers in music and certainly doesn't disappoint in concert. And in relative terms, his music has contributed tremendously to society, bringing deep raptures
That's
of
the interesting
emotion
thing about
and
this
imagination
recording.
to many people.
It's actually, you can hear it actually on the recording where the audience is following me, so if they can follow where I'm going, I can open up, stretch out more. So that would be my favorite type of audience.
Everyone knows you were greatly influenced by American blues greats, Muddy Waters, John Lee Hooker. Are there any musicians or groups today that really excite you?
No.
No.
Absolutely not. No.
Nothing?
Nothing. Because I think it's all been done. It's all been done. Yeah. If I hadn't known what I know now, I wouldn't have become famous, for one thing. Then, when I was starting out, there wasn't any choices, right? You know, there's a thing about people that write about music that, you know, they don't really know anything about it, and they assume a lot of stuff. Like, they assume that you had choices and you were, like, that you thought it out and all that, you know. So I didn't really have any choices, and I get put in situations where I get ripped off, you know, time and time again, ad nauseum. So then I had to become something I didn't want to be, just to make a living.
It says being famous is hard for many people, but you seem to handle it well. What's your secret?
Well, the key word there is seem. You know, it's not what it seems.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not what it seems.